The world is changing. Our devices are becoming more connected, and data is driving nearly every aspect of our daily lives, from our time at home to our time at work, and everything in between. That in between is where a company called Wejo comes in. Wejo is a newly publicly traded company focused on connected vehicle data. Wejo works with Palantir to organize trillions of data points from over 11 million vehicles on the road today. Then they use that data to help their clients make strategic and tactical business decisions. Imagine being able to look at the driving and charging patterns of electric vehicles to figure out the best places to build new charging infrastructure. Imagine seeing the flow of traffic in real time and managing traffic lights to shorten everyone's commute based on what's actually happening on the road. Imagine using every car's temperature sensors, fog lights, windshield wipers, and even their braking patterns to identify bad weather and individual hazards on the road. Well, you don't have to imagine these things because they're exactly the kinds of capabilities that Wejo is building on top of Palantir's Foundry. Richard Barlow is Wejo's founder and CEO. The last time we spoke was about a quarter ago, right before their business combination with Virtuoso Acquisition Corp. Since then, the market for high-tech growth stocks has been incredibly volatile, and as a newly publicly traded company, Wejo's stock has certainly felt that impact. So, given the harsh market conditions of today, why should investors believe that Wejo is a good investment? To answer that question, I sat down for another exclusive interview with Richard, and we caught up on everything that Wejo has been up to, including some big developments that they're working on with Palantir and Microsoft. If you watch until the end, you'll gain a solid understanding of connected vehicle data, and you'll also learn about Wejo's newest offerings with Palantir, their other avenues for growth, and the future of connected mobility. Full disclosure, I'm not a financial advisor, and nothing in this episode is financial advice. I took no compensation for this interview, but I am currently a Wejo shareholder and may increase my position in Wejo in the near future based on this research. Your time is valuable, so I've cut out all of the fluff, and timestamps are enabled for your convenience. So, let's get right into it. Richard, it's great to see you. The last time we spoke was right before your reverse merger with Virtuoso Acquisition Corp. The markets have gone wild this year. How have you been? How's Wejo been?
It's been an interesting start. We're like any tech stock. I think one of the things I'm really happy about and really excited about is we've got a good trading volume. We'd have all loved for the share performance to be better, but we are reflective of the growth tech stocks more broadly. We've had some great news flow since we last met. So you'll have seen the Palantir EVOS announcement last week. We made our announcement with Neuroledger Microsoft at the beginning of the year at CES. We made an announcement of our Q3 results in December. We gave a business update where we announced our first more than $1 million contract where we licensed software to a motor manufacturer in the US. So it's been an interesting 3 months. Really excited this year. Really excited about some of the announcements we're going to make. Really excited by the support we've had from some of your followers. It's been good.
That's awesome. Yeah, I'm really excited to get into it with you over the course of this interview.
I can't wait. Looking forward to it.
For the investors who are watching now who didn't catch the most recent interview with Wejo, you work with connected vehicle data. What does that mean, and what opportunities is Wejo chasing in the market exactly?
Well, we work with both autonomous vehicles, electric vehicles, and connected vehicles. And our overall sort of pool of data, we have about 12 million vehicles live on platform. What a connected vehicle is which encompasses AV and EV as well, is that the vast majority of new vehicles sold globally every year have embedded connectivity. They have communication devices called a TCU embedded in the fabric or the network of the car. Whether the car's a modern car running something called an Ethernet, or whether it's running a more historic network called CAN. These networks in the car are a circular network, and every sensor in the car, so there can be every button in the car. There might be a sensor in the window detecting if something's stopping the window closed. There'll be a sensor in the windshield wiper. There'll be a sensor measuring temperature outside. You catch my drift. There are thousands of sensors in the car. Typically, a seat can have up to 35 sensors in it. So there can be sensors on the buttons of the seat. So what we do is we work with motor manufacturers, industry termed OEMs, and we receive access to up to 220 sensors in vehicle. So we get the live location of vehicles with consent of the driver, and we see 7% of vehicles driving around New York, for example. We see 20% of all vehicles driving around Detroit. And you can imagine why, when we're working with some of the world's largest OEMs, where they have their headquarters in Detroit, that will explain why we have 20% of all vehicles on the road. but it's quite surreal walking down the streets of Detroit and seeing 1 in 5 vehicles. And I'm thinking when I walk down there, I'm getting data from that vehicle, from that vehicle, from that vehicle. So we get live location, and that's helping smart cities understand about emissions in cities, understand about the weight of vehicles and how that can affect the deconstruction of roads. But then we're also getting powertrain data. So we know engine temperature. I previously had a vehicle where I actually sent the CEO a spreadsheet tracking the temperature rising on my engine. And I'm a geek. And I wanted to understand why I was losing so much oil in the vehicle. And I showed in a 20-minute period this rising of temperature. And that's sort of the example of some of the live data from vehicles. So we get powertrain, we get battery status. And later on, we can talk about Palantir and our announcement with what we call EVOS. But
Sure.
we're getting live battery data from vehicles. So we know how batteries are performing. We know when a vehicle's parked. We know if it's gone in park. We know if it's then been charged or not. So we've got this huge amount of data, and we process over 17 billion data points a day. We process over 13 trillion today. So it's a broad array. So if you think about any button in the car, any moving, anything mechanical in the vehicle, anything that involves the vehicle moving, there'll be a sensor, and that data is potentially available for analysis, which we receive.
Wejo just finished their first quarter as a publicly traded company. What makes Wejo stand out in today's tough market against other young companies that investors should be thinking about right now?
We are in terms of live vehicles on platform, in terms of scale of revenues, we are the market leader from connected vehicle, AV and EV data. We built incredible relationships with the likes of Microsoft, who don't tend to do public equity investments. We've built an incredible relationship with Palantir, and they've been not only a great investor, but also a great commercial partner. And also we had the private backing or private company backing from General Motors for 3 years, who've continued to back us in the public market as well, where they're also one of our pipe investors. So we feel we're standout in terms of alternative data providers in the connected vehicle data space in all key metrics. We're transparent about our unit economics. And then beyond that, what we found with the being the public markets is that the inbound demand has been even greater. We're getting more and more demand from more and more different types of agencies, different industries who want to do more with the data that we control and represent.
I read your investor presentations and so on, and it seems that one of the things that you're getting into now is smart infrastructure. Do you want to talk a little bit about that, as well as maybe your relationship with Palantir on this latest product?
Smart infrastructure is a broad definition for industry, but it's this idea of having more smarter data sources. We just announced with Palantir something called EVOS, the EV operating system. And it's come from really that I was working with Palantir, Wejo was working with Palantir. And we've seen this myth about the industry that has around range anxiety. Everyone worries about the size of batteries in the vehicle. That's not the challenge. The challenge is actually, a typical driver drives 40, 50 miles a day. Most EVs, all EVs now, have more than enough battery life to do multiples of those journeys on a day-to-day basis. So the challenge really is that if the vehicle can be plugged in at home or can be plugged in where the vehicle's parked at night, then how can you actually provide real-time management for the grid that not all vehicles are sat trying to charge overnight at the same time? How can you throttle that if a vehicle's plugged in from, say, 9 p.m. to 7 a.m., how can you throttle that a group of vehicles in a grid are charged from 9 p.m. to 10 p.m., then another group are going from 10 p.m. to 11 p.m.? If you can work with the grid, and that's what the EVOS is doing with Palantir, is that we're providing a real-time dynamic view. So a grid then knows when actually they need to direct more power to a particular area. But conversely, we can then work with OEMs who can then build apps within the car or the vehicle that isn't just taking charge all the time, but isn't taking charge when it's plugged in, but taking charge when the grid can handle it. That's going to fundamentally reduce a lot of the infrastructure budgets that have been asked for at the moment, which is assuming that everyone needs to be upgraded. It doesn't. That's not the challenge. The challenge is to control the power to the vehicles at the right time, which doesn't inconvenience the consumer, doesn't inconvenience the driver. That's what's exciting to me about EVOS. It's this idea that we can now help power energy companies make more intelligent decisions and truly gives them smart infrastructure.
Sure, that makes a lot of sense. And so the idea there is to really optimize EV infrastructure investment. Is that like a fair way to?
Yeah, and if you look at the Biden Infrastructure Act, there's about 8 billion allocated for EV infrastructure. So it's helped that, and that's not a lot, really, in
Right.
terms of infrastructure spend. But actually, we can help optimize how that is spent, how that's effectively spent. I get to get the best coverage, so that all consumers who want to own an EV or drive an EV can actually have an EV that's always on demand, always readily, always charged. They don't need to worry about the fact it was only charged from 2 a.m. to 2:30 a.m. It's got enough charge to do their typical journeys. They can always override. They can always say they wanted a full charge, but actually most people don't need that in their vehicle.
That's so interesting. Yeah. So it sounds like this OS with Palantir really focuses on EV infrastructure optimization. Do you
Yeah.
plan on launching other OSs that might optimize for other things? For example, infrastructure for traffic management, optimizing traffic lights and stop signs and like things like that. Is there plans for spin-offs for other versions of optimization OSs with Palantir?
So in terms of Wejo Studio, and Wejo Studios is now becoming more and more powered by Foundry. We built Studio before Foundry, and we're now doing a migration across and leveraging all the power that Foundry gives to us. We've built products now where we know when traffic lights are red or green. Sometimes that's from vehicles identifying that or determining that the traffic light has changed from red to green. Sometimes it's taking third-party data sources in. So, and that's another example of how we can help smart city infrastructure. But going beyond that, what we're now designing, and we announced at the beginning of January, is what we call our digital twin. Although Palantir gave it away and said actually we're calling it Meta Twin. We see 77 million car journeys a day or vehicle journeys a day in cities in the US, for example. So we're seeing huge amounts of data. We've collected over 507 billion miles of data. We can now recreate that data and create a 3D environment, a meta twin, a digital twin, where you can see all those vehicles driving around. But then the question leads to a city planner. Well, what would happen if a road was changed from 2 lanes to 1 lane? And actually, I was talking to a portfolio manager, and that was his exact question. He said, hey, I live in Austin, and on my road, we lobbied the city planners to go from 2 lanes to 1 lane. Did that help the congestion on my road? And we could actually show with Wejo Studio in 2D right now the benefit to an easier flowing of traffic. Well, now in our 3D environment, which we'll be launching this year, a smart city planner will be able to reconfigure a road and actually see in real time vehicles changing their behaviors, because we've learned from more than 11 million instances what happens when 2 vehicles come together, and we've had data from both vehicles. So it's really exciting, and it's hugely powerful and shows the power of the data we've collected and the power of what Foundry is now giving to us as a business.
So that digital twin of both cars and cities is something that's enabled by Foundry?
The first alpha we built in house, and now we're working through a Foundry to we're now migrating all that into Foundry. So we are in active conversations, planning that through. We're actively moving Wejo Studio within the Foundry environment. So we built Studio within our own sort of innovation lab, and then now we're migrating to Foundry. Now we're leveraging what Foundry can now give to us at scale. So we sort of innovate in house, and then we work with Palantir to then super scale out. So it's a great partnership. I was with the guys and girls at Palantir all day yesterday in London, and we've got some really exciting stuff we'll be doing this year.
There's like so much to dig into here. Digital twins and talking about things like the metaverse have been on everybody's mind lately, but I think the practical applications here are something worth digging into a little bit. So you're building digital twins on both the individual car level and a hypothetical city level. Is that correct?
Every 3D game is a meta of some sort. So this is just another meta. It'll be a meta environment for scientists, for R&D labs to understand how vehicles behave, how they will change with differing dynamics. It's great for the autonomous vehicle industry community, for example. There's over 40 DMV licenses for OEMs who are doing AV trials in the US. But you'll notice a theme. They're all focused in the same city. They're all focused in very small parts of the US. Apart from Tesla, there's no national approach for OEMs about how they're going to make their cars, make their AVs be performant for more than a few vehicles. So we will open our meta twin that any OEM with AV can run their own proprietary AV algorithm within our twin and understand about what happens when they come across a human driving a vehicle. We understand the outcomes already of a human driving at 55 miles an hour, where the temperature is 2 degrees outside, it's 2:30 a.m. in the morning, it's snowing. We know what happens next if a vehicle hits another vehicle. We've already pre-built that, or machine learned, and we've built this dictionary of understandings. So it's hugely powerful, and that'd be a great way of bringing forward the AV revolution or evolution. There's a lot of AVs, but they're limited to San Francisco, they're limited to Arizona. There's the AV community now needs to know about how they can bring forward and enable all communities to be able to have better access to all these vehicles. That will only work in a digital environment to start with.
Sure. No, that makes a lot of sense. So last year, Tesla talked a lot about how one of their big reasons for going to vision only was to be able to build a simulation engine and be able to learn from, computer simulations, video game graphics, this digital twin of basically America, and pull visual data from that simulation space, that digital space, back into the physical space. Do you have any plans for a similar capability where now that you've built this digital twin, you can simulate data and integrate that with your real data streams, or add value by simulated data? Or is this strictly for experimentation?
No, I mean, we want to get to a point where any OEM can log in and they can go into any city and they can put their own defined algorithm of how their AV drives, and they can then drive around. They can, and we already have videos which we're building in house where we can see what's going on, what's happening next. So we simulate pedestrians crossing the road. We simulate bikes going down the road. This is all built. It's in alpha. We are not setting a date when we're launching this, but this is our plan, and this is why when we announced Wejo going to the market at the end of last year, we were very clear. We are becoming the communication and data stack of industry. We've collected a huge amount of data. We're working with multiple OEMs. They're trusting us with their data, and we're now showing the power of that trust. We're now showing them building some incredible products. They're going to revolutionize smart cities, make the AV revolution happen, make EV more feasible, quicker, rather than the worry of range anxiety. And these are some examples of what we call data for good. We're thinking about where data adds value, not just cynically sell data, but actually, how does data add value? How does it reduce the cost of your insurance? How does it reduce the cost of repairing the vehicle? As another examples.
No, those are great. Yeah, and so I think that makes a lot of sense, your core mission, with why you've partnered with Palantir, who works with novel data companies to enable a lot of these things to happen, right? The amount of data integration, aggregation, processing, and insights you generate require something like a foundry to spin up in less than a couple decades, right? Can you talk a little more about? Oh, go ahead, please.
No, I was going to say. I mean, I saw yesterday at Palantir where we're giving some demonstrations, and what they did with the UK health service called the NHS, they integrated over 150 NHS trusts. They integrated hundreds of factories or warehouses in days during the COVID pandemic, and gave this real-time view of how PPE was being distributed, of how, and then eventually how vaccines were being distributed, and it was then simplified to a dashboard that the NHS CEOs could see, the government could see, and it was a great example of actually data for good for Palantir, but a great example of how Foundry can be super scaled and be scaled so quickly. In terms of why Palantir and Wejo work together, we've now got the same approach. We work with OEMs and we have access to their data. We're now working with what they call the tier 1 and tier 2 supply chain. The tier 1, tier 2 supply chain are the parts providers that go into your vehicle. Whether it's an engine manufacturer, whether it's a seat manufacturer, you will find an OEM has hundreds of suppliers in their supply chain. What the OEMs have never done is that they've never shared insights of the data from sensors back with their supply chain after the vehicles are being sold. That's why we're working with foundries, that we have this ambition that the hundreds and thousands of tier 1, tier 2, tier 3s in the overall OEM supply chain will all be integrated into foundry. And that's our ambition, we're applying the same idea that Palantir had with foundry with the aerospace industry, with Airbus. We're now doing the same with them in the automotive space. And it's been an incredible partnership. You've hopefully seen that we've done some joint marketing already with the likes of EVOS. We're going to have more to be shouting about this year, next year, and beyond.
That's super exciting. Yeah. So just to bring the Wejo and Palantir section to a cohesive conclusion, the way I kind of imagine this building out is you and Palantir together are building a digital twin at the macro level and at the car level. People are able to log in and see everything going on, car by car, but also this macro level traffic, what's going on in the city, let's change this road, let's look at what happens if we invest here and how that affects everything going on, as well as make decisions using that digital twin in near real time. Is that fair? Like, one of the things that Wejo often talks about is being the communication layer between vehicles. Is that vehicle to vehicle? Is that vehicle to cloud to vehicle? Is that vehicle to digital twin to vehicle? Where does the decision making actually take place, and how does that work at like a detailed data level?
So the catch-all is V2X, so it's vehicle to anything. So whether it's vehicle to vehicle, whether it's vehicle to cloud, we're working, and we can talk in a second about what we're doing at the edge with terms of vehicles and our announcement at the edge. But it's vehicle to anything. It's this idea that the vehicles to date have not had AI or ML sort of focus around data leaving. It's been quite it's been quite sort of formulated in terms of what data should or shouldn't leave the car or vehicle in what sort of speed and which data points it is. We then provide the intelligence at the cloud. We're now empowering vehicles to actually have more of that power, more of that intelligence back in the vehicle. But ultimately, right now, we enable vehicle to anything sharing of data.
So vehicle to anything, does that mean literally things like if a vehicle is waiting at an intersection, it's 3 a.m, there's no one coming and a light is red, the vehicle can connect or communicate to the traffic light and say, hey dude, turn green, I'm the only one here? Or what exactly does it mean, vehicle to anything?
Yeah, so vehicle to infrastructure is exactly that. It's this idea that we're already getting traffic light data, whether it's traffic light data from the traffic lights themselves or whether it's inferred from the vehicles. This idea of a more effective infrastructure, communication to infrastructure, is part of our remit. It ultimately then leads to better safety, reduce emissions, and emissions is broad definition. It's not just think about combustion engines. It's all attributes of a vehicle, which could then lead to emissions.
So one of the infrastructure use cases I'm often thinking about are which chargers and which gas stations have lines, right? That's not something we really get to see today. Is that something that emerges from being able to collect all this data? What chargers are open, where it makes sense to put chargers, where it makes sense to, load up on gas? Is it more about path planning? Is it more about infrastructure? Where do you see like the big picture net effect happening?
So actually, we've already got that running in our Foundry in our Foundry installation at Wejo. So you could already see live charging availability within Wejo's Foundry environment. So we're already getting data from both vehicles and data from infrastructure. So that's a great example of, we know when infrastructure is failing, we know when chargers are failing. That has got to be addressed as well. But we're already seeing that, and that's a great example of vehicle to infrastructure communication. But infrastructure can be street lights. If there's no vehicle movements on a street, why do the lights need to be on? That can save energy. There's all sorts of benefits that go from vehicle to infrastructure. Vehicle to infrastructure can be a parking lot, can be curbside parking, anything that ultimately can lead to more efficient use of a vehicle, which then always leads to better safety, less congestion. Anything that we class as data for good, we are focusing on and we're thinking about as a business.
So with all that data being communicated between cars and infrastructure, and between, the physical layer and the digital twin, comes a lot of issues with transmission, latency, storing all that data. How do you guys handle that?
So we process over 17 billion data points a day. At peak, 500,000 data points a second. Right back in the cloud, we hold over 8 petabytes of data. So a big amount of data. And there's all sorts of challenges around that. So we're continually machine learning from that data asset. So we needed a cloud partner that could help us be able to break that data down. And Microsoft Azure has become a great partner of ours, who've helped us be better with data. That's not to say we don't have Google BigQuery instances. That's not to say we don't have AWS S3 instances. But when we were looking at the next 5 years, we looked at the whole industry of cloud partners, and we recognize Microsoft is doing really interesting things in automotive, and has built some really interesting products that were very relevant to what we were wanting to do. One of the biggest challenges in industry, and I mentioned earlier on this podcast, is that vehicles right now we're not that intelligent about determining when data should be sent, and there is a bottleneck. The bottleneck is the 4G network or becoming the 5G network. So, and that bottleneck means there's only so much data that can leave the car, and the higher value data, the data that can help, say, the AV industry, such as image data, will use up a big proportion of that of the size of the pipe or the bottleneck, the communication channel. So we've already been faced with the challenge of we're hitting a sort of a critical mass of data leaving vehicles, and that means we don't need all the data all the time, and yet we can't instruct a vehicle in real time to stop sending us data. So we end up taking more and more data, and even if we get no more value from that particular data field or data point. So we've been working for the last 2 years on how we can have machine learned outcomes of when data should or shouldn't be sent from the vehicle. We've proven we can reduce the data overhead by 80% and still have a 100% intact data point at the other end. So by reducing the data overhead by 80%, that means you can have more data out to the vehicle, which is going to be absolutely perfect for AV. The AV has not yet finished learning everything it needs to learn. The whole industry hasn't. So we've developed approach where at the vehicle level we can throttle the data when it needs to leave the vehicle, so the data needs to leave the vehicle or not. Then on the cloud side, we're now working with Microsoft, and we've launched a product called Neural Edge, where we're leveraging edge-based expertise from the Azure sort of portfolio to rebuild the data. And the idea that we can then rebuild the data and it still be at 100% integrity means that we can then have a much bigger data pool to then do even more enhanced machine learning. And then back to our digital twin scenario earlier, that's going to be so important, because one day what we want is the 40 EVs with DMV licenses to do AV. We want every one of those different AVs to be driving within our digital twin, and then they all learn together how they can interact together in this new world where there's going to be no one proprietary AV approach. There's going to be tens or potentially hundreds, and these vehicles are all going to need to live together. And there's going to need to be a better way of handling data, rather than at the moment, when an AV is machine learning how to drive around a city, the data stays within the vehicle all day, and then it's downloaded at the end of the day. Well, that can't happen when you've got millions of vehicles driving around. There needs to be a real-time way for data to be shared. And that's what we've been building, is what we call Neural Edge. But this idea that we will become the comm stack that enables, whether it's EVs or AVs or connected vehicles, a real-time way, a sub-millisecond, a low latency way of data leaving the vehicle and going back to the vehicle.
Is this just about, vehicles with four wheels on roads, or can this be expanded to flying vehicles like eVTOLs, scooters, urban scooters in cities? Talk to me a little bit about all of the other edge cases that this can or can't expand to.
I mean, any mobility. So micro mobility. I was looking at the Jetson 1 the other day, which is a single manned flying craft. Anything that enables mobility, anything that's got smart mobility, we should be able to take data from it. In the new world of mobility, micro mobility or scooters will need to know when vehicles are close. There needs to be a much more effective, a much more efficient way of sharing data between all types of mobility devices, vehicles.
Sure. And so one of the implicit things that I think we haven't said explicitly is this also works for autonomous logistics, right? So we've talked a lot about, scooters, cars, and then flying vehicles, charging infrastructure. These are all things that people tend to touch. But, another thing that's really important to optimize is, trucks leaving warehouses and getting to, big businesses, right? Loading and unloading between ports and other things like that. How does Wejo help, industrial players, not just, citizens with point A to B transportation?
Yeah, I mean, we've got so many ideas. We're focusing on our core, which is vehicles. Absolutely in the future, I'm hugely excited by, say, what BrightDrop are doing. Hugely excited about the robotics that firms like ARKW are doing. There's all sorts of different ways of efficiency around logistics. For us, we're stopping the vehicle level for now, whether it's micromobility or whether it's trucks. We won't go into logistics, but in terms of platform we're building, it is like Foundry is. It's compatible with almost any data source.
Sure.
But right now our focus is vehicles. We are a connected vehicle, an AV, an autonomous vehicle, and an electric vehicle business.
Got it. No, that makes a lot of sense. And it's great to clarify, what Wejo does and doesn't touch so we can, better understand the scope, the unit economics. So talk to me a little bit more about the communications, right? So this Neural Edge program sounds like it's more than just, toning down so you only get 1 out of every 5 points out of the vehicle and then reconstructing it back on the cloud. Is there any other edge computing going on at the vehicle level? What else does Neural Edge provide? Is it security and standardization? What else beyond, interpolation does Neural Edge do?
It won't do standardization. There are a lot of tier one semiconductor providers who have their own approach to how data is around the vehicle. So we're not doing that. We're working with semiconductor providers. We're working with the tier ones who have their own approach about how they want to have their own data formats. We're providing a platform where we can see the data in whatever format it is. We run something called a common data model where we then standardize at the edge. So rather than actually forcing a standard on anyone else, we say, like Foundry does, we can take the data in any format. Let us take in any format at the edge of the vehicle. Let us use our own proprietary machine learning about when the data should or shouldn't leave the vehicle. We'll determine whether it needs to be sent at a sub-latent basis, sub-millisecond latent basis, or whether it should be sent at the end of journey. At the end of journey, there's not the necessity for the real-time sending of data. So that's the intelligence at the edge that we've been developing.
Got it.
And then when it's rebuilt at the other end, if we've only determined to receive some data now, but we receive other data in the journey, we need to rebuild that. We need to make sure that the integrity is still there of the data for further machine learning in the future. That's our focus. Our focus is the efficiency of data leaving the vehicle. We're clear what we do. We're clear we're about being a data ecosystem and comm stack for industry. That's our swim lane. That's our focus, and our focus is ultimately about vehicles becoming more and more efficient to ultimately drive to better safety on the roads, lower emissions, and less congestion.
It sounds to me like what Neural Edge does is it enables you to be able to say, hey, tone down the amount of data we send in real time so that we can reconstruct it on the cloud, reconstruct this incomplete data set on the cloud and get all of the data without having to transmit it. Is that true?
Yeah, so earlier on I was talking about the fact that the OEMs, most manufacturers, are all wondering about how they can get AV to scale. And one of the challenges they've got is that at the moment, in terms of their lab environment or their R&D environment, they have maybe hundreds of cars driving around cities, if that, less than hundreds usually. Ultimately, they're collecting huge amounts of data in vehicle that they don't send back in real time. They can't do real time views. They may all be machine learning within the vehicle for that driving today. Then they'll review the vehicle, or they'll review the data after the event. That's not scalable. If OEMs want to scale to millions of AVs, they need to have a way of actually doing more real-time learning of data back in cloud in a real-time environment. So what Neural Edge does is it enables the real-time sending of data and the real-time processing of data at the edge, where we can then share our own learnings, which we've had from other OEMs, share our own machine learning outcomes, provide access to our own digital twin. That will enable AVs to become mass market rather than this ad hoc approach to every vehicle doing its own, storing its own data before after event analysis.
Yeah, one thing I just realized is usually what I think of is Palantir is sort of a huge player in edge computing, but you're leveraging a lot of Microsoft technology to make that happen. Can you describe a little bit more about, when we think about Palantir and Microsoft, I naively think about them as competitors, but it seems Wejo has a great working relationship with both. Is it Microsoft is your partner for computing and Palantir is your partner for data analytics. Like how have you managed to bring these two seeming competitors together? And what can you clarify their roles like for Wejo?
No, so you can opt to run Palantir's Foundry within varying cloud environments. So we chose to opt to run it within the Azure environment. There's no competitive issue there. You need to choose a cloud vendor. You need to choose a vendor that provides you a scale of being able to process huge volumes of data. So there is not a competitive tension, and not something that we've experienced. Palantir has been a great partner. Microsoft's happy with our relationship as well. So it's been a great triumvirate that we're leveraging the best of Foundry in its distribution, its best in terms of data analytics, and we're using the best of Azure with the ability to real-time process data and to build other tools within the Azure environment which don't leverage Foundry. So, for example, we've built a real-time consent engine for an OEM or a privacy engine. And we've licensed that, and that was actually our first more than $1 million contract, where the OEM now leverages our expertise within the Azure environment to anonymize data in real time for millions of vehicles. So, and that's not something that you would do in the Foundry environment. It's certainly something you'd do within the Azure environment.
That's really exciting. And it sounds like you're getting both low-level data, like individual sensors, and high-level data enough to build digital twins of not just vehicles, but all the way to smart cities. Is that correct?
Yeah, and it's really interesting. We talk about low-level sensors, and one of my new favorite sort of case studies is that we're getting there's microphones in the wheel arches of certain cars, which at a low level is there to detect a vehicle aquaplaning. So when the wheel is going through rain and then it stops turning, so the vehicle is losing control. So the sensor was used to measure this vehicle aquaplaning, and then the ABS, the ESP can be activated accordingly. Well, we've repurposed, so to speak, this low level sensor, and now we're identifying frequencies so we can identify panel damage in vehicles. So we can identify panel damage within 12 centimeters, so 4 inches. So we can identify within about 4 inches where a panel's been damaged. So you think about the use case of insurance. If an insurer or carrier can be informed in real time where the panel damage has occurred before the vehicle's even being picked up, taken to a body shop, the insurer can already make sure the parts are on order, or if the body shop is prepped to repair, say, aluminum compared to, say, plastic, as another example. So then if you think about smart cities, we as I mentioned to you before, we see 20% of vehicles moving around Detroit, 7% in New York, and other cities, including actually 6% of the whole of the state of California. So having this live data in real time means that we see really interesting things. We identify in real time where an intersection stops taking traffic. That might seem obvious, but we're working with, say, one of the world's largest e-commerce companies, where they've told us we've improved delivery routing by 30%, which means they can deliver more parcels. And their trucks can have less emissions because we're helping them be more efficient with their vehicles delivering those parcels. So in terms of smart cities is a broad definition, and we're leaders in what we call smart mobility. But it's about reducing congestion in cities. It's about reducing emissions. It's about improving safety on the roads. So we're absolutely at the forefront of powering all cities becoming smart cities with this smart mobility data.
That's super exciting. I have like a ton of questions about that, actually. My first big question is, all right, you guys see 20% of all vehicles on the road in a specific city, for example. What is the critical mass there? Is there a point where it's like, hey, when we see one in every 3 cars, we can just identify all traffic everywhere? Or is that like a bad way to think about it?
No, I mean we've built some really sophisticated models. So we know when in fact we're under indexing. So over the whole of the US, we see about 1.2% of all vehicles, and that as a straight statistic isn't critical mass. But we've then done trend-based demographic analysis. So by virtue of a vehicle being more modern, it's probably going to be more prime. It's less likely to be, say, a fleet truck, for example. So we over-index then profiles of vehicles where we haven't got critical mass. So for us, by having such intimate amount of detail and such huge amounts of detail, we've then indexed accordingly So we can now give you real-time views of the top 50 cities in the US and be statistically relevant in all those cities and beyond.
Wow, that's super exciting. And it sounds like, so one of the questions I was going to ask you was about individual pieces of data and where they're most valuable. But I think the question, based on what you're saying, is actually a little different, right? It's, when you're thinking about puddles on the road and sensors catching hydroplaning, that's useful at the car level for things like insurance and identifying damage and what happened. But it's also useful on this macro level of, in the city, identifying where that hydroplaning happened and saying, hey, there's a hazard here, a hydroplaning puddle hazard, watch out, and send that signal to other cars. Can you explain a little bit about like what types of data you find most valuable, in the sense that here's like, these are the 10 things that we use everywhere and all these different kinds of scenarios? Is that the right way to think about it?
Yeah, well, one of the things we do is we receive nearly 1,000 inbound inquiries a month from organizations, whether it's departments of transport, whether it's government agencies, whether it's insurance carriers. A whole sort of broad array of differing industries want to understand about what connected vehicle data, EV data, and AV data can mean for their organization. And we offer something called Wejo Data Labs, which is a sandbox environment. And we say, look, go into this environment and run queries. See what you think about this data, and it's a trend basis, so there's no personal information data released, but it helps us understand about what the recipients of data want. How can we prioritize our product roadmap, for example? So I can give you an example of a particular organization where they put 4 data scientists within Wejo Data Labs, the sandbox, and they ran something like 2,000 queries over a 4-day period. So we got great understandings about how that data benefit that organization. That particular organization, they wanted to understand about whether they could optimize, in effect, real-time optimize how to reconfigure stores based on footfall, based on traffic flow around their store. Should they fundamentally change based on the profile of traffic on a per day basis as to what is at the front of the store? And you can only do that with real-time data. So fundamentally, we start with this data lab. We let people log in. We charge them for it. They then run queries. We then prioritize accordingly as our broader product roadmap. In terms of the value of data, we have what we call preferred partner status relationships with OEMs, where that gives us degrees of exclusivity in defined marketplaces, unless the OEM or the auto manufacturer has a pre-existing relationship in place. And we've determined where the high value in data is. So we've determined that traffic management, which includes mapping, is a high value market. And you may have seen our 8K. We talk about the unit economics per marketplace per year. And by 2025, traffic management, we talk about over $3 per vehicle per year being the value in that traffic space alone. Remote diagnostics, RDS, we talk about that being a $3 per vehicle per year marketplace. We then talk about insurance, and we've broken down into really granular detail. One of the things that we will be starting to report in our 10Qs and our 10K is the unit economics per vehicle, per year, per territory, per marketplace. So complete transparency. So that, and it helps you understand, the people ask me what's the biggest risk for Wejo? And obviously regulatory is always a risk, but actually our biggest risk is OpEx. It's, are we getting the timing right for the right marketplace in the right territory for the right group of OEMs? We have demand already to build insurance products in Japan. Is it right to prioritize the rollout in Japan compared to, say, Europe for insurance? Well, we've got the commercial justification to do that, but we're still front loaded in terms of our OpEx, our spend before we see a payback. So it's important we get that right and we maximize ultimately the unit economics per vehicle, per year, per territory.
No, that makes a lot of sense. And, maximize that while minimizing your risk. So it sounds like the big lesson to investors is what Wejo is aggressively tackling now is understanding at the unit economics level what data is driving the most value across a wide variety of verticals. For example, looking at hydroplaning data, not just at the micro one vehicle level, but at this macro, smart city hazard level, and identifying which sensors contribute to that through, the journey of the entire data, and focusing aggressively on using and optimizing those use cases.
That's where the value is, and that's how we try and differentiate ourselves, is by not saying we can do everything today. There's loads of value in it today. It's actually saying Do you know what? This is a long journey. But over time, as we build up that value, that value per vehicle, you'll see our unit economics slowly scaling up, which is a great recurring revenue model, and it's a great compounding sort of value to the OEMs, where the typical vehicle has got a lifetime of 7 to 9 years.
So even though the stock market isn't favoring high-tech growth companies right now, Wejo is partnering with big players like Microsoft and Palantir to solve some big problems for over a dozen major car companies today, from Ford and GM to Lucid and even Bentley. In my opinion, their path to growth is clear. As vehicles get more and more sophisticated, each one will have more data to provide Wejo. That compounds with more and more of them getting connected to Wejo each and every day. Add in smart infrastructure, micro-mobility solutions, and digital twins of everything that Wejo connects to, and you have a very powerful end-to-end platform for connected vehicle data. All of that data will unlock new use cases and ultimately new markets for Wejo to enter and use their massive amount of data for good. That's a future I'm really excited to keep digging into. So, on behalf of ticker symbol U, a big thank you to Wejo's founder and CEO Richard Barlow for doing another exclusive interview, as well as the rest of the Wejo team for making this happen during such an exciting time in the stock market. And as for you, stay long, stay strong, and thanks for watching. Until next time, this is ticker symbol U. My name is Alex, reminding you that the best investment you can make is in you.